As we consider the shaking or the controversy that's entered into our movement, the great split that has happened, we can now identify that split at not just the level of individuals, but ministries, or as Ellen White would say, companies, have been destined to leave God's church. Those companies or ministries were led by leading figures. Those leading figures had bound them into companies, each with their own particular doctrine, and they didn't leave as individuals, they left as groups. That work of separation that occurred cannot be modeled using Matthew 13. We see it being described in other ways. If you're looking for a Bible verse, perhaps the most important verse that shows us this, at least the easiest one, is Daniel 11 verse 41. Describes the work of the King of the North. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many shall be overthrown. Now, when that verse was first analyzed, first explained in the Time of the End magazine, the way it was described is that many Seventh-day Adventists would fall away during the Sunday law time period. We now understand that that is not a correct understanding of that verse. The passage is describing the falling away of those who are part of God's remnant movement. And this explanation or understanding of verse 41 has taken many people by surprise. In fact, I think some people are still not even aware of it. In verse 41, it says, "Many shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon." Besides the history, besides the lines, which are two testimonies that explain this, you can very simply and succinctly use parables. You can use parables by comparing and contrasting those two groups to show that what's being described are the last two movements that come to war against each other in the Sunday law history. The true and the counterfeit. And this idea of the true and the counterfeit has been misunderstood by many in our movement. If you have not seen those presentations, those studies that discuss this change, then I'd advise you or counsel you to watch them. Can someone help remind me where those presentations could be found? So I'm going to go to Germany, 2018. Where is it done before that? Was it Wales? Before that it was Wales, 2018. I don't know if it was done systematically before then. No? Is that no? Okay. So before this, for quite some time, it was understood who those people who were overthrown are. It was presented and weaved into presentations before those two camp meetings. But those are the two camp meetings where it begins to be laid out, I guess, formally or systematically. We go into verse 41 and explain who the overthrown are and why they are who we say that they are. It's done in Wales first, and then in the same month, it's done in Germany. This is December 2018. And Germany, December 2018. They're back-to-back camp meetings. And the reason why this becomes significant, because it's at this juncture, after the midnight cry has already begun to be presented, that one of the major points of separation between this movement and Future for America occurs. When I say what I'm about to say, that you should know what that event is, I don't say that to tell people off because they don't know. Because I suspect most of you don't. The reason why I mention that in strong language, for two reasons. First of all, you can see how God is leading this movement step by step. Secondly, you can see that God's messengers are already aware of the issue before most of the congregation or most of the movement is aware of it. I expressed that in our first presentation. Elder Jeff knows that Future for America are going to separate long before September 2019. She shows the problems publicly and speaks about them privately. This is one of those events. It comes into the public domain that, before I say that, if we go to Kenya, November 2018, the month before, there's a 1 month prophecy school there which a number of you attended. And in the midst of that time period, what began to be expressed was that there was a split in the movement. Two groups of disciples based upon two different approaches. Following month, Elder Jeff will explain it this way: to smooth over the cracks. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. I was in agreement to smooth over the cracks and not let division destroy the movement. He would teach, he is the messenger of verse 40. And I am the messenger of verse 41. Of course, that's not correct. But that was his way of explaining why there was this difference. It kind of smoothed over the cracks until you get to the spring of 2019 at the Brazilian School of the Prophets. And it's there where another major crack occurs in this separation process, which is the study of half right and half wrong. But coming back to here, what is being taught is the subject of how the close of probation is going to work. So Elder Jeff is going to understand that November the 9th is what I would call a hard close of probation. Michael stands up for the priests, whereas I would teach that Michael does not stand up for the priests. And what we identify as the shut door of 2019 is not Michael standing up, it's something else. And people don't realize the significance of what is going to happen there. When that separation occurs, even though we are still together, that model that they have is going to be used to shape and define all future doctrine for Future for America. They're going to use the doctrine here that Michael stands up for the priests. They're going to use this doctrine to teach people that this movement is now being run by Jesuits. It's a satanic organization. And the threads of that already begin here. Because if you don't believe in a fixed or rigid close of probation, you can't develop that theology. That there is no more probationary time for us. This is one of the points that I explained earlier, where they are already beginning to show and demonstrate this separation work that's happening. And we could go to other ones during that period of time that you can clearly demonstrate this work of separation. For many years, I have had concerns of the way this movement uses inspiration. And the ones that define us perhaps the most are two passages, two different studies. One of them is about the 2520. One of them is about 9/11. Now, both of those studies have got important key spirit of prophecy quotes attached to them. This one is The Great Controversy, page 351. And this one is Testimonies to the Church, volume 9, page 11. And there's the second one, Life Sketches 411, which is a Review and Herald article. July 6, 1905, or the other way around? 1906? So July 5th. So we've taken those Spirit of Prophecy quotes and they have helped to shape and define these two doctrines. They're not the only way we come up with that light, but they really are the key portions of inspiration that we use to defend those truths. During the Midnight Cry message, before the Midnight Cry message, I knew that our use of this Spirit of Prophecy quote was wrong. And also the use of those two other Spirit of Prophecy quotes were also wrong. You could not use these to defend these doctrines. But I wouldn't be drawn into public statements on this issue. It seemed to me that God was gathering his people, and therefore I didn't feel it was my duty, my prerogative, to begin to cause division in our movement. So I would avoid making controversial statements about these references. During the Midnight Cry dispensation, perhaps even a teeny bit before that, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe I'll just say it this way. I felt compelled. I don't want to invoke the Holy Spirit. I don't want to say it's the Holy Spirit. People can come to their own conclusions on that subject. But I feel compelled by circumstances to begin to address this. And it's a very fine balancing act. We're in East Africa. And something that I've observed in my trips to Africa generally is that each country has its own culture, its own way of behaving. And what I've noticed is that the brethren from South Sudan really love to ask questions. When we were in South Sudan recently, at the end of the presentation, we probably had about nearly 100 people there. Immediately, we'd have 20 people come up and they would surround you. And they would just ask questions, not even what you've taught on. So they do that with Elder Tessie's presentations. And I was at the back of the auditorium. And they'd come and surround me. So they're really keen to ask questions. I think that's good. The reason why I mention that is in this history, 2018, coming into 19, the midnight cry history, and slightly before, I already begin to feel convicted that I need to address these issues. I'm constrained because I do not want to publicly endorse this rift that people can see. So I say it gently, perhaps not gentle enough. I allude to it, maybe not subtly enough, because the Sudanese brethren pick up on this, and I get question after question. Can you explain this verse? What's your perspective on these passages? And there's all these WhatsApp communication that I'm getting. And if you ask them, they'll testify that I never responded. I never responded to their question when they would ask me what my opinion on this passage is. The reason they're asking the question because they already can see that I'm challenging this movement's perspective. So during the Midnight Cry era, 2019, I begin to address these two passages directly, publicly. I do it at camp meetings, I do it at schools of the prophets. And we go into the details of those verses and explain exactly what they are teaching. Now, part of the reason why this was not done before, separate to the idea of creating a rift, having these two factions in our movement, separate to that is another issue. It's something that's going to come to a head in this movement, which is, how do you read? How readest thou? A plain reading. And I'll give a third one. Original intent. Now this begins to come to a head from January to March 2019 in Brazil. And once this comes to the forefront, how readest thou? Once this becomes public domain material, that gives me the license to begin to publicly discuss these subjects. Because now we can talk about how we read inspiration. At the same time, there's going to be a conflict in this movement, not between myself and Elder Jeff. That had been done here, November, December. Now this one's going to be between Elder Tess and Elder Pippinger. And this is going to be about who is right and who is wrong. It's now termed half right, half wrong. So he has a fight with me, and then a fight with her. And all of this is done while the movement is still intact. So if you're not keeping an eye on the steady train of events you will not see when this bubble is about to burst in September. So once this subject has come into the public consciousness of our movement, how do we read? And now I should be able to ask you, what was the subject? What was the Bible verse? What was the story that was connected to this? Because it wasn't about Michael standing up and it wasn't any of this. At least not directly. What was the subject that was confronted and dealt with? Not the law. How we read. What verse is now going to be under scrutiny when we consider how we read? One moment. Good to continue? Okay. So if you could please watch the noise, because now I'm being picked up on the camera mic. Does anybody know what the story or the verse is that now is under scrutiny in Brazil when it comes to how we read? Give me the verse. Not that one. Luke 10:26 is the statement that's taken from. Daniel 11, verse 14. Smith versus movement. No. Okay. Let me rephrase it this way. Smith versus Pippinger. I don't say that in a disparaging way. In all of our presentations, it's neither Elder Tessie's or my intent to insult or say anything bad about Elder Jeff Pippinger. We believe he was the person that was selected by God, first messenger, to create this movement. Despite our differences, we still have respect for him. But I say it this way so that we can have a simple reference point, so we can hook onto all of this complex study with a simple idea. 2 men, 2 doctrines, 2 ways of reading. So if you're not familiar with this, then you need to go back to those studies. If it's too much, because it's over 60 presentations, we can do a shortcut version. And what's that? Tahiti. I can't remember the month. May 2019. These are the same studies. This is the presentation style. This is the school style. So here, we're going to confront head on how we read inspiration. What do we mean by original intent? Plain reading. The reason why this becomes so important is, who is this person here? first angel's messenger. First angel. He's the person that will empower this movement. We'll call him 1E. And what we discover, what I discover, maybe other people had seen it before, is that this is not Smith versus Pippinger, which is what I think we've taught in this movement for decades. This is not that. This is Lich versus Pippinger. And that becomes significantly different. We'll give you the reference. APEC or CE? We'll just give page 95. You need to go before that. Go to the beginning of the section. So Smith is Daniel and the Revelation. That's not the coding for it. He's going to give his commentary. But we don't want to take his commentary. Because we want to say, even though he helps God, he doesn't rise to the level of supremacy that we would listen to him. So we would go to Lich. Now Lich is the first angel's messenger. Some people don't understand that, some people don't accept that. Not going to prove it. Go to the classes in Uganda. This came up. We do know that Lich is the messenger of 1840. And we know that 1840 is the empowerment of the first angel. Where Lich uses 1 day equals 1 year. We teach, I teach, Revelation 14, 6 and 7 is Revelation 10. It's a repeat and enlarge. Revelation 10 is Lich. The message comes down and becomes empowered because of his study. Revelation 14 would argue is Miller, but you can also show that it's Lich. Just from the language. We're bringing many studies together with these simple statements. They are deceptively simple, but we spent many hours publicly explaining them. Let's summarize. Lich empowers the first angel. So the Pippinger empowers the first angel. So therefore they have the same weight. And once we realize that, then the significance of these studies, how we read, fundamentally changes the way we need to understand Daniel 11 verse 40 to 45. Hopefully we can see that. I'm assuming you all know his version. Hold that thought. I want to go back to this subject here. Michael standing up. So when we start thinking about Michael standing up, 2019, what are we saying? Revelation 22 verse 11. He who is righteous remains righteous. He who's filthy remains filthy. November the 9th, 2019. Revelation 22 verse 11 is fulfilled. According to who? FFA. Their model. We say that is wrong. Why? Because it's already been taught that those who are overthrown are whom? Are they people in this movement? Or are they people in Adventism? In the Time of the End magazine, verse 41, overthrown equals who? SVAs. The Time of the End magazine. Today, we teach. We. I'm not saying FFA. If they hold on to their magazine perspective, they cannot change. We teach. The overthrow is people in the church triumphant. There's a fundamental difference between those two stories, those two studies. I don't know how many of us understand that. I don't know how many of us who understand it and believe it. Why is this going to become significant? We compare and contrast two groups. Who are they? Who are the two groups? Overthrown versus Edom, Moab, and Ammon. I just asked this question. If we were wrong about this, do you think we're going to be wrong about this? If we don't know how to identify who the overthrown people are, you think we're going to understand who this group of people are? Think those who are overthrown and those who escape. Okay, look, have power back. I'll give you money. This information has been in the public domain in this movement for a long while now. Definitely you can go back to Wales 2018. It's already understood before that. Now if you go to the Time of the End magazine and you try and find out who this is, you will see there are current understanding that the Elder Tess is now bringing to the movement, is beginning to change and adjust our perspective who this is. And that's present truth. One of the present truth messages that we need to understand is to help to identify who are the people that will escape. If you want to understand who are the people who will escape, you need to understand who they escape from. The work is not complete, but this is one of the one of the major studies that was put into place at the Ugandan School of the Prophets. The discussion about identifying the dynamics of this group of people who will escape. So that's why it becomes significant that you know who this group are. When you compare and contrast. Because when that study was first done, we just said this was the world. Put simply. But when we spoke about this, we said this was a group of people who were free. And this was a people who was, in prison. And that's how we developed the logic of this being people in the church triumphant that will be overthrown. We never discussed this one. This is partly what was, it wasn't finished, but it was partly brought to view at the Ugandan School of the Prophets. This is present truth that's now still being unfolded to us. That's why this becomes a major stumbling block between the two groups. How readest thou? We begin to see that Future for America and this movement are reading significantly differently. At the time, from January to May, Future America are silent in any opposition to this. In fact, most people in the movement pick up that study and they see its glorious light. Just another layer that needs to be added to the midnight cry message. The reason why this becomes significant is because it addresses our understanding of these passages here at two levels. The first, how do we read inspiration? And at that level, I felt that I now have prophetic license to begin to publicly discuss these subjects, which is what was done. I don't know where the first place I actually systematically begin to do this. I know it's done in France. July, August 2019. I don't know if it's done before that. I think it is. Anybody knows? I think it's before. But it's definitely laid out in France. So we're going to look at these two passages here, and we're going to explain that these are not referring to 9/11. We're going to see how we read. I call it intellectual honesty. There's no opposition that comes from Future for America on those studies. In fact, I don't think from anybody that I know. There's no public opposition. That we go back into this and we see it's not referring to 9/11. I give a different explanation. It's referring to the close of probation. In fact, this is all laid out here And in June, you can see June is missing. In June, I go to Future for America, and we have studies, and there is no opposition to anything that's being taught. In fact, there is passive acceptance by Elder Jeff Pippinger, and there's proactive and active agreement by other members of that ministry. Now, they'll give a story that he was distracted, asleep. The other ones were deceived by mesmerism, because we're spiritualists apparently. So they just ignore all of that experience that they had. And I want to counsel and warn people here. If you ever get to the place where you destroy your own testimony, your own personal experience with God, you are in an extremely dangerous place. Because these people stood up and testified to the truthfulness of what Elder Tess and myself were teaching. They were the forefront, they're at the forefront in supporting us emotionally, morally, financially. This was their testimony. They would stand up and say how it's changed their lives, how God was in this. Only a few short weeks later, they suddenly call us satanic and that they were deluded. And to testify at that in that way becomes really dangerous. So we're laying out the truth that these studies are not referring to 9/11. They're referring to the close of probation. And I'm hoping every one of us can see that. What I haven't done, I would say, because I haven't had time, perhaps God has a reason why, but I haven't made a public statement on this. I haven't gone to GC 351 and systematically shown the movement why this is not the 2520. That needs to still be done. We have a number of things that need to be done. That's one of them. And the other one that needs to be done is the study on the nature of man, part 2. I believe God leads his movement. And therefore, I have the position, the faith, to know that the reason why this study has not been done yet is that it needs to be put in a certain place to do a certain work. I'm not sure of what that is yet. Time will tell. So you cannot take these passages to teach that the 2520 is the longest and the last prophecy, because it's not. Go to Inspiration and Ellen White will tell you it is not the longest and last prophecy brought to view in Inspiration. That is a fight for another day. This one has been put into the public domain. It's been here for many months now. I've understood it at least for a couple of years. Hopefully we're all at the same place, we're all okay. Now, the reason why I want us to see this issue about how we read, is the following. In fact, if I have taught you correctly, and you have been listening, then if I were to ask you the question, you should all be able to give me the answer. If you've kept pace with my train of thought. Let's go back to our previous study. Why is there this huge issue, this huge disagreement? We are having to clear up the mess of Future for America. What was their mess? What was their mess that they created? They did not sufficiently train the sisters in this movement. That's the mess. Can we all accept that? Future for America's mess is that they did not train our sisters sufficiently. They were always suppressed. This is a much bigger issue, the issue of equality. It runs into every avenue of a person's life. Into your home life, into your family life, into how we treat sisters, as well as the prophetic role of our sisters. I'm not minimizing any of those others. I just want to take this line of thought, this layer, because I want us to see how many things are all coming together. What's on this board and what's on this board. Hundreds of hours of study. Tens of hours in the public domain. Actually, I think all of that added is more than 100. Just the video material. Then there's all the private discussions, the private studies that have gone on top of that. There's a substantial amount of evidence. Please don't sleep. It's only the morning of the first day. Future for America have not sufficiently trained our sisters, so we have to remedy that. That's our work here. That's why we are being so stringent about the issue of equality. It's not just that we've got a fixation about this thing. It's not just that we saw it in the world. It's not just that we saw it traced through history and the evil of that. It's all of that. But also, we're fixing the mistakes and the errors that Future for America brought to this movement. It's one of the things that they were wrong about. So drastically wrong that we have to take perhaps the most important 2 years of this reform line, the reform line of the 144,000, at the very moment when we should be focusing on important things, like fighting the enemy, we have to pause and we have to fix the damage that Future for America have done to us, which is not training this movement properly, not training the sisters of this movement properly. And whilst we're fixing this mess that they created, they're busily creating another mess. The mess of July 18th. Their false message, based upon false methodology, because they don't know how to read, that we too will have to fix. That's a battle for another day. Whilst they're creating this present day mess, our work, the work of the movement of God, is to fix the problem. And therefore, if you have two movements, one of them being true to the line, in agreement with the work or the history of Elijah, of Jacob's time of trouble, are fixing things that have gone wrong, or another group that have just introduced another mess, because they have a habit of creating messes. We identify that through the phrase or the symbology of what? Half right, half wrong. So they're right about the activities of Islam, but they're wrong of the nature of Islam and what it will be doing. And we too have to correct that issue. So this morning's study, where you have two movements, the true and the false, the true preparing for the great work of harvest, the true fixing the mistakes of the past, the false, future for America, perpetuating their errors, continuing to teach falsehoods based upon a misreading of God's word. That's what you need to understand. You need to decide who the true and the false movements are. Coming back to our study. We've traced how there have been major clashes in our movement. Elder Jeff and myself, over Daniel 11, verse 41. If he will correct that he was the prophet of verse 40 and I was verse 41, who would you trust, him or me, to explain verse 41? Out of his own mouth he testifies who you should trust. I don't know how he would backtrack from that, except just to say he made a mistake. Now, he said that it was he and I. He's 40, I'm 41. And I obliged, and I started dealing with who are those that are overthrown. But I left part of the verse alone. This bit. I just left that. Go check the studies, you'll see that it gets left. It doesn't get addressed. Who was that left for? Who has addressed that issue? That I told you. Elder Tess. Elder Tess. So many elders. So Elder Tess is beginning to deal with this issue. So when he said he was the messenger of verse 40, what he's saying is Elder Tess and myself are the messengers of verse 41. But in order to understand verse 41, you need to understand verse 40. In closing, What I want to do is tie all of these thoughts together with this issue here, July 18. So what's the connection? If you read carefully this passage here, it's symbolized by 9/11, 19, page 11. For the coming of the King. That's what this section is dealing with. The King is coming. Hopefully we're all aware of that. That we know that what this passage is dealing with. So I want to make a connection. If you go to page 11, do you find anything of significance? Is there anything significant on page 11? No, there isn't. Section 1, which is all this section, is for the coming of the King. Subsection, the last crisis. Are we okay with that? This is the last crisis. This begins on page 11. So the last crisis is page 11. The last crisis. All of this is that the King is coming. So the last crisis begins page 11 and goes to page 18. Now when we come to our studies on 9/11, what page do we gravitate to? It's not page 11. Page 12, 13 into 14. So we look at pages 12 to 14. Nothing to do with page 11. But it's in the section. This is 9/11. Now what people I don't think are aware of. I'm not sure even if you follow Future for America you're aware of this. I'm going to tell you what the this is. Before I do that, remember, how do we read these passages? Do we read them to be 9/11 or the close of probation? Which one? As you work your way through this, we then come to the next section. This begins page 19. And it says we're called to be witnesses. So we need now to witness. Page 19, paragraph 1. In a special sense, Seventh-day Adventists have been set in the world as watchmen and light bearers. Sorry? There are many people in the world who warn people of things. out of all of those people who are warning, there's one group who are special. Seventh-day Adventists. So Seventh-day Adventists have been set apart from everyone else as the special watchmen and the special light bearers. To us, we have been given the last warning, the last crisis, tells you what's going to happen. Called to be witnesses, tells you who is going to tell you what's happening. The message, the messengers. Can we see that? Just from the title. Tells you what's going to happen. Tells you who's going to tell you what's going to happen. Say amen if you can see that. Good. What is this story about? July 18th. I don't mean Islam. What are Future for America doing? Standing up and doing what? Warning. They believe they're watchmen with special light who have been entrusted with the last final warning for the perishing world. So they think they're fulfilling this. They're fulfilling their commission. This was page 11 to 18. This is page 19. We'll get to the end. They think they're fulfilling page 19 by doing this great work of prediction. How many of us know what their prediction is? Put your hand up if you know what they're predicting. No, put your hand up if you don't know. So they have not done a good job because it's February and their prediction is in July and the prediction is not for you. They don't care about the priest. They care about the world. So if you don't even know what the prediction is, you're in dire straits. You're in big trouble. Which is why they're coming to Africa, they're coming to Uganda to explain what their prediction is. So I'll tell you on their behalf. They are predicting that on the 18th of July, in one of the southern cities in the state of Tennessee, in a city called Nashville, there will be a nuclear attack by Islam. I don't think they define who Islam is, but Islam is going to deliver a nuclear attack upon the city of Nashville on July 18th this year. They've predicted it, and they're going to begin to warn people. So this is the warning that they're giving as the watchmen that have been specially set aside. Unlike us, they have light. They're the light bearers. And to them have been entrusted the last warning, because we have no message to give. What are we interested in? What are we interested in? While they're giving this important last warning message, we're interested in having sisters sit at the front, wear trousers, ordain them, tell husbands how to treat their wives properly, instruct fathers how to treat their daughters properly, Because we're fixated about equality. Can you see the distinction between the two? They've got an important message. We're just wasting our time on nonsense. Now, what is interesting about their prediction, hopefully we'll begin to lay this out this week. We won't be able to finish it, but I want to touch on some points. This study that they have on July 18, where do you think they even got it from? Where did they get that study from? Testimonies to the Church, Volume 9. It's in the same section that this one was coming from. And that's what's so interesting in this whole thing. This is section 1. For the coming of the King. They have taken portion of inspiration here and they have manipulated it and turned it into 9/11. This is 19 to 29. 10 pages. And what they're going to do is going to take the very next section, called to be witnesses, and they're going to get that one and they're going to apply it to July 18, 2020. This is page 28. This is not 9/11. This is not September the 11th, 2001. This is July 18, 2020. We already know that this is the close of probation. That's what Ellen White teaches us. The difference between what Future for America are teaching and what we're teaching is not some minor point about July 18. This is the culmination of hundreds of hours of public material, an understanding of how we're supposed to read inspiration that we've seen for many years now, things that we're already just beginning to tackle, all based on a similar methodology. What they have done is they've taken a passage from 9/11 and they've distorted it from a study that deals with the close of probation to one that was dealing with 9/11 and then July 18. There are so many things wrong with all of this. It's hard to show you the gravity and the seriousness of this situation. But what I want everyone to see is that the work that we are involved in of dealing with equality is not some side issue. It's a fundamental point that needs to be worked out and fixed before we go to the Levites. It's so important that God has given us this opportunity. He carved out this special time for our sisters to come on to parity, for our brothers to make room for that work to happen, to support and assist their sisters. I said recently to help train them, which I got from a study in Judges chapter 4 in Sudan. Judges chapter 4. Judges 4. That is a correct study based upon that story. But of course, many of the brothers here, the men, they don't even understand how these lines are working. So it'd be very difficult for them to teach or train the sisters. So I want to make this point as we close, that July 18, with Future for America, are investing everything that they have over this one doctrine, that they're willing to expend vast amount of resources to come and share this message, especially here in Africa. Should show you how serious and important this is. And the argument that they would have, when you can compare them with us, that we don't even have much of a message, because all we're doing is worrying about women wearing trousers and equality, and just destroying inspiration, because we no longer talk about a national Sunday law. That's how they are going to frame things. You need to decide if that is the correct framework. I'm suggesting on today's studies that this is not the only perspective, but I wanted to give one perspective, that what we're doing is the most important work that's been given to priests, which is to fix our movement before we do the greatest work of evangelism that God's people have ever been instructed to do, beginning with the Levites and then transitioning to the Nethinims. Before we do that, we cannot work with a dysfunctional priesthood. I can't even say we're only going to work with half of the priests, the men, because the men don't even understand the message. Can't say, oh, we'll work with the women, because the women have been insufficiently trained. Everybody needs fixing. The sisters need to be brought up to speed. They need to be given opportunity. And if the brothers did not hinder them, they can accomplish that work. The brothers also need to be retrained. Not only to be cured of this FFA mindset, this patriarchal mindset, this headship mindset, this mindset that we're doing sisters a favor when we give them some opportunity. Not only that, but our brothers need to understand how to read properly, They need to understand what Future for America are doing and why they're doing this. All of us are in the same situation. God has called us to make the final preparations for battle. In the midst of all of this, we're now dealing with an enemy, false prophet, who are troubling us. I'm not saying we shouldn't take heed to what they're doing. I'm not saying that they are irrelevant to us. But what I am saying is we need to understand who and what we're dealing with, so we can correctly identify who and what we are. So today's presentations tied up the subject of equality from the perspective that our sisters were systematically not trained because of people who had a patriarchal perspective of life. God has raised up leaders to fix that problem. Future for America attack us for doing that. And that is connected to this study. That Future for America do not understand how to read inspiration. I've traced that line. We focused on one portion of inspiration. Volume 9. Beginning page 11. Section 1. For the coming of the King. They've taken two passages. Page 13, page 28. And they turned them upside down and made them things that were not originally intended. And when they did that, they forfeited the right to be called God's messengers. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, help each of us as we bow before you to take heed concerning what you are teaching us. Lord, there are many people in this room who have understood the messages that we have shared today, but there are equally many who have not. May those who have much be willing to share with those who have little. As you taught us this lesson in the story of the manna, everybody was equally fed and equally content. May this be our experience this week. May we be willing to help our brother or our sister to understand and explain these issues, both at a simple level and those issues that are complicated. If we're in the valley of decision, if we don't understand whose side we're on, it's my hope and prayer that we would see the truth and make a firm decision for that truth. And Father, for those people who are following Future for America, as they watch these presentations, which they will, I ask, Lord, that it would do a work to convict them and show them that they need to walk away from the darkness and enter into the true light. Be with us and bless us now, we pray in Jesus' name.